Hi, I am CJ Devgan, and welcome to another edition of Breaking Barriers, where my goal is to provide you with proven tools to help you transform your business. We are living in times where business, as usual, is not sustainable. Because new disruptors are arriving every day, therefore, you too must reinvent and break barriers that are holding you back. If you are struggling to grow your business, check out my website at cjdevgan.com and learn about my consulting and coaching services, and let's talk.
Our guest today is Rocco. He's a director of research and executive advisor at Infotech Research Group in London, Ontario. Prior to this, he was CIO at the city of Brampton. Without further ado, let me welcome Rocco from Hamilton, Ontario. Good morning, Rocco. How are you doing?
Good. Good morning, CJ. Glad to be with you this morning.
Thank you so much for taking time out during this holiday season. So tell us, our audience, something interesting about yourself before we get into the nitty-gritty of technology.
Well, I've had a very long career, both in the private and public sector, and I've done projects in both areas, and certainly learned not by book, but certainly by experience as to all the elements that I guess they don't teach you in school about delivering projects on time and making them of value to the corporation.
Absolutely. So what gravitated you towards technology? You started your career, if I'm not wrong, in 90s, right?
Actually, I started my career as a software developer for DeFasco with ArcelorMittal. So I have been in IT for my whole career. I also have also went to university for sociology, which these days actually I use more of than what I learned in IT. So very important, and I'll talk more about that later about how it's the real. You really have to understand both people, process, and technology. It really you do need to know all three and not just the technology.
Excellent. So as an executive advisor, as previously a CIO for a very large city, people who don't know where Brampton, Ontario is. Brampton, Ontario is one of the fastest growing communities in Canada. I think it has a population of 300,000 people. And though it is a suburb to Toronto, but it's a very big growing city in Ontario. So help us understand, as a CIO, as a leader to be providing advice to the city council, what were some of the key things that you learned in that experience?
Well, first of all, Brampton is a unique city. It's actually a lot larger now. It's 600,000. It's the ninth largest city in Canada. But the really interesting part about it is that the average age of the citizens is 35. So you have a city that's grown exponentially over the years, and with a very young population. And obviously they're all tech savvy. So it was a real great learning experience. I guess one of the key things about being successful at the city of Brampton was that as someone who was in private sector, you have to transition from understanding business value of projects to public value, and that's a real key learning experience, because with most private sectors, there's three reasons why you do anything. One is to increase revenue. The other one is to reduce costs, and then the third one is legislative compliance. On the city side, you're actually looking at the three basic tenets of any city is to look after the quality of life for the citizens in three main areas, and I used to always refer to them as live, work, and play. And those as a IT leader, any project you look at, you really have to look at the end receiver, who's actually receiving the value of what you're doing, and it's always the citizen or the local businesses that are trying to move into the area or that exist. And so it's really important that you understand there are two very different motivational things. And the reason that is so key is that when you approach the executive, you have to speak in those terms. When you speak to politicians, they're focused on the quality of life for their citizens, and even though you may be doing the very same things you do in a private sector, the motivations are different and the communications have to be different. And because you got to remember, politicians are there to represent the people. They have a short term. In other words, they think in 4-year blocks because that's the typical election cycle, and that applies to both to all 3 levels of government. And so when you're making your business case, it's a very different approach, and you have to understand the time frames. You have to understand the motivation, and then with that, the last thing that's critical is how you communicate.
That's an amazing point that you touch on, communication, and throughout the series that has been a constant throughout our conversations. One of the key success factor for any large or small project, for that matter, is communication and how you communicate. So tell us let's delve into communication. So what kind of techniques have you used in communication? How do you strategize whether you're going to do a report, whether you're going to have a one-on-one conversation, whether you're going to have a town hall or a steering committee? What kind of communication mediums have you used, and how have you gone out and selected those communication mediums for your stakeholders?
Well, the important or the key thing about any communication is you have to know your audience, and you have to understand what resonates with your audience. So whether you're doing a town hall or whether you're bringing them together in a steering committee, typically in a large project, you're going to span all the areas. You're going to have one-on-one communications, individual meetings, specifically with or I should say, especially with the politicians, because you do need to understand what resonates with them. And I always found that one-on-one conversations to start, to make sure that you understood everybody's point of view, and do not discount point of view. That is so key. And so you have to understand what resonates with them at that time. And then, yes, steering committees work as far as governance and making sure that you stay on track and that you have inclusivity in the decision-making process. And then there's the other really important communication is to the project staff, making sure that they understand or they have line of sight as to why they're doing things. In the end, to tell you the truth, it really, boils down to motivation. Every time you're at one of those, regardless of the form of communication you use, and honestly, you will use all of them that you mentioned. It's just that you'll use them strategically for specific purposes. But it's so key that you understand what is motivating those key stakeholders, and you always have to remember why. What value do you add talking to them or having those forms of communication? Otherwise, you may as well just write an email. And so the difference in any communication is yourself and how you approach the subject.
Excellent. So you mentioned another word that I'm glad you mentioned, stakeholders. And I'm assuming that the stakeholders that you have in public organizations, especially in city, are much different than in a private sector. So because the citizens of the city become stakeholders as well for any project, along with the politicians, along with the project members. So how do you go about doing stakeholder um, analysis, if that's a word, or something that you do?
With stakeholders, you break it down into the individual groups, and like I said, you have to understand what do they need to know and when do they need to know it. With the public, it's important that they understand how their tax dollars are being spent and the value that they're receiving. With the politicians, they want to have some inclusivity in the decisions that are being made and the direction they are going. More at a very high level. Obviously, they're not going to be involved in the more granular decisions on a project. And then as you get through, as you start to go down the organizational structure, you get down to the bureaucratic level with the corporate executive committees, the department heads, and then eventually with the project team. But one of the things that's also very important to know is that in public organizations, you have department heads that, for the most part, are autonomous. They do have a reporting structure up to whether it's a management board or whether it's a chief administrative officer. But in the end, those people are there to provide, or they're also providing value. In the end, they are the value stream that you are going to embed the technology and to provide the eventual value, the public value. But those department heads have their own ways of doing things. They understand their business, and you need to make sure that that level of management is addressed as well, and that they are comfortable in allowing the project to basically change what they're doing. So it's very important that you do that because in the end, when it gets down to actually execution, you're going to need them.
Again, a good segue into this departmental head. So how do a project actually get selected at City? Walk us through some of the techniques they have used, whether it's the departmental heads who come forward with idea, with business case, or is it the CIO as a central body goes and picks projects for different departments? So walk us through.
Well, I'd like to tell you it's very much like the private industry with the business case, but I certainly don't want to mislead you. You do go through the standard approaches you would in the private industry with you start with the corporate strategic plan, where the city's going or where the level of government, what they're hoping to achieve in their term of government. You look at that. And then you start to see which areas are going to require technology in order to support that strategic goal or objective. And then as you work further and further down from the corporate strategic plan, you're looking at the individual departmental plans. And that's when you actually start to look at what is being demanded from IT. But the important thing there is that in order to vet all those demands, you do need a structured business case. You do need to have standardized metrics or an evaluation criteria. And so it's really important because in the end, when you do go to council or when you do have to present that back to the public, you do need to show that this is evidence or fact-based decision-making, that you actually have facts to support which projects you're going to go ahead with and how they're prioritized. And it's not all dollars and cents. When I say business case, a lot of people immediately go to the dollars and sort of value for money, net present value, IRR, all those other wonderful things you use to calculate the financial merits of a project. It's the business case you develop has a number of evaluation criteria, including benefit to the public, and a few other things that typically you don't find in the private sector. And having those business cases is key because not only do you prioritize your project? Because when you sit in a steering committee, you're going to say, you know what, we're going to use a methodical approach here. We're going to go through these business demands, and then we're going to determine sort of what projects have the greatest merit. And because you're using a standard set of a standard set for your evaluation criteria, it works. And there's even the debate as you go through it. You're really debating the merits of the project as they are, as per the evaluation criteria. But you don't vary your evaluation criteria just because one group wants something over another. So that's always key because it sets the level playing field, and then it also provides the justification when you go forward. And that when you're 3 or 4 months down the line of project, and then especially in government where potentially in the middle of your project you have a change of government like an election, and so then you get new politicians in, maybe some new people heading up those departments, and they're going to say, why are you doing this? You do need to have that those historical artifacts that justify the project, because then you can always go back to it. So that's why having those strong business cases that have been put together, have been vetted, is key, not just to prioritize the project, but as you go further down, it justifies the project. And then at the end, it's what you use to determine whether you received the public value for it. Because, that's the other thing. In these criteria, you need to say, this is what we were hoping to achieve. Did we achieve it? And then even maybe a year later, when you're doing sort of another check, are we still achieving those benefits? So that to me is sort of the litmus test. But those business cases really form the foundation for any future thought.
So you bring two very valid points, and I want to talk about that one by one. Number one is if a government changes, who becomes the sponsor for that program? Given each administration may have their own leaders at departmental heads, as you've mentioned them previously. So you do have, in private sector, every project has a champion, and we call that champion a project executive sponsor, project sponsor, who drives that project to completion. All the decisions, all the blockers that are on your path, they are responsible for removing those issues and decisions, making those decisions. So is that kind of a role exists in public sector as well?
Yes. I mean, the department head or the business unit that's eventually accountable, not responsible, but accountable for delivering that service to the public or to the business or to whatever. There's always, there's always an executive sponsor, and that comes from the bureaucratic realm, not from the political realm. And so the politicians may change, but typically at the bureaucratic level, that doesn't change too much unless there's something dramatic, as with the provincial government, they decide to cancel a whole program in essence. But and then sort of if they get rid of the program or that you're delivering to the public, then potentially any in-flight IT projects are going to be canceled as well. So barring that, usually there's more stability in the lines of business, and the executive sponsor is typically the department head or the person that is accountable for eventually delivering that service to the public, and that's really where you want to sort of attach yourself to. The other ones, they're more volatile. They also have very different timing horizons, and so. But usually, what's more stable is at the bureaucratic level, at the department head, and that is usually your executive champion.
So, not to put you on the spot, but you mentioned something about inflated projects that get abandoned in certain stages. So, during your tenure, do you have a percentage, and again, these are rough percentages, of projects that do get overinflated and got cancelled?
Have I run into those?
Sorry?
I'm not understanding the question.
So how many projects, on a percentage wise, you during your tenure got overinflated, over budget, and did not deliver the value that they originally promised to deliver? Do you have some rough estimate of how many projects did not deliver the value that were originally committed?
Ahead, but I would say it's low, and the reason for that is that typically I do not like to have long drawn out projects that are multi years, just because I'm sensitive to the time frames. So to me, my preference was always to set it up as a program with more discrete deliverables that could be done within within a year. Because as much as I talked about sort of the change in government, there's annual budgets change as well. If you have a downturn in the economy, and they decide that the projects that they were planning aren't feasible anymore because the incoming taxation or whatever the fees are going lower, then you have to respond to that, and you have to be flexible enough. So. To me, my preference is always to do more discrete deliverables, and chain them together in a program.
Fantastic. So let's talk about these factors that allowed you to bring down this value, or bring down the projects that did not deliver value. And those are the key things that we want to take away for our audience. The number one, make sure that you have short duration projects that are chained together with a larger program with a very discrete deliverables. Anything around methodology, anything around talent, anything around decision making?
Well, over the last few years, I've become a big fan of agile versus waterfall. And I'm not going to go into a big dissertation on that, but to me, agile seems to fit more readily with sort of, having something that you can do and deliver. Because one of the key motivational factors in a project is to, and especially with in public office, you do need to show deliverables, and you need to show them as early as possible, because typically that is the justification for going to the next step. And so always having those early deliverables continues to garner trust and confidence that the project is working, or the program is working, and that the money is being well invested. So to me, I'm a big fan of agile. I'm sure there's lots of people that would argue against that and prefer waterfall, but I think these days it's you have to be faster, and you have to deliver. And if you're going to fail, you have to fail early.
Nicely said. Now, one of the challenges that I always hear from people who like being agile, like being nimble, but one of their challenges is that how do you not have requirements defined? So how do you work with elaborations of requirement in an agile world when you're working on a 2-week, 3-week sprints to deliver something? Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, just make sure they're written down, because you do have to get some formal agreement on that, or else you're going to spend a lot of time doing a lot of things. But in the end, I think what's key is that you understand the goal or the objective. And to me, I always bring that back to the value. At the beginning of the project, what was your intention with the value that you were trying to get out of this activity? And you know what? Maybe you do it differently. Maybe the objectives might change, but the value proposition has to be intact. And if you can't focus on that, or if you don't have that, then you're right. You can spend a lot of time doing a lot of different things, and then in the end, deciding on something completely different. If it's not, and to me, when you have the value proposition, or you have that well-defined sort of value statement, it's key, because as you start to go along the project or the activity, you use that, you do your constant checks against that. Is this still moving us in that direction? Are we still going to achieve that if we continue along this thing? And if it's no, then that's when you stop.
No, very, very nicely said. I completely agree that our value proposition has to be very firm. We need to be crystal clear as to what we want to do, what our objectives are. And another thing that you mentioned, having those periodic gate reviews by making sure that we are still progressing. So give us a little more insight into what kind of gates did you use? How many gates did you have? And who was engaged during those gates discussion to make sure that the project is still tracking along the progress path or promised path?
I used it, you're pretty much your standard sort of project methodology gates, and you take a look at it at I guess when you conceptualize, or the design stage. You do another check at the once you've sort of assembled how you're going to execute on this. So at the development stage, and each time, once you develop the product, the prototype, you're looking back to make sure that it fits with the design, and that the design is still valid against the value. And then, there's a check prior to after testing, and prior to going operational, and then obviously post implementation. And what I do want to stress, though, is that post implementation piece, because as you know, you can complete a project and you can follow the PMI on cost, scope, and time, and think that you've delivered the quality. But in the end, if that project, or if the operational thinking isn't there to sustain the ongoing public value, whether that's funding or whether that's the technology continues to be viable, it'll survive maybe a year, and then it'll become abandoned. And it's funny because the old saying, or the cliche I always use, is that the operation was successful, but the patient died. And
excellent. That actually, we are having an interesting conversation, and I want to limit this thing for next. I will try to close this thing in the next 10 minutes for our audience. Our goal is to no longer than 30 minutes, but you bring two very, very important aspects to it, and one is real benefit realization management process and procedures to ensure that that projects and you and I both have seen projects that have been delivered on budget, on time, on scope, but they failed to provide the benefits that were originally promised to them. So therefore, having business realization management processes and procedures to ensure that the patient survives the operation and is fit to go and live the life that they need to live, in your terms. So do you have any kind of set policies, procedures? I know this is a new area that a lot of conversations are happening over the last couple of years. And do you have some kind of a maturation process to plan that, how well as an organization that are taking on these large projects are actually realizing the benefits?
What I found useful is that the business unit has to really be the product owner, because IT is going to is going to go on to the next project or to the next value, and IT can't own the end product. And when I say end product, is I'm using that sort of a very openly or loosely, in that whatever that public value, whatever the mechanism for delivering that public value, that's the product. And that executive sponsor needs to become a product owner. And that's where you continue, because now they're accountable. And so they're going to have the greatest self-interest in the benefit realization and to making sure that that continues. So, from my airport experience, it's one thing that helps all the passengers and really makes operations more efficient. But in the end, that passenger processing is a business product, and it needs to be owned by the accountable business unit. And to me, that's where that key, where you maintain that benefit realization, because now you have someone who has a vested interest in making sure that that value. Because in the end, remember that, if you go back to the business case, you did all these this mathematical or statistical analysis and showing what the payback was going to be. And typically that extends way beyond the project and goes into several years of operation. And that has to stay, because that's your test for the business value. And so making sure that you have the business unit as a product owner, and that is set out at the beginning of the project, and they understand, I think becomes very effective in that benefit realization process.
Excellent, fantastic. Now on to the last topic, and this is more around the execution of a large project. And you mentioned at the onset also that one of the key stakeholders are the people who are actually executing the program. So do you have any special tips for our audiences in terms of how to go about and select the team that they want to deploy? How do you create a bench for your organization? I understand in the public sector, you cannot have a large bench. Everyone needs to be 100% utilized. So give us some insight into how you build the talent pool at the city and at other organizations that you have led. Did we lose you? Hello?
CJ, can you hear me?
Yeah, we lost you for a couple of
okay.
seconds.
Sorry. I'm I have no issues with seeking external resources, as long as you understand how you're going to use those resources. One of the examples, was when we were looking to develop our business intelligence framework at the city. We brought in a business partner with the understanding that they weren't just going to do the work, but they were also going to impart their expertise and their knowledge onto the existing staff. And so, it wasn't sort of just outsourcing or contracting out the work. We actually brought them in, and we had them work with our staff together, so that there was an increase in knowledge of both. Our staff provided the business knowledge, or the business intimacy that the external partner needed to use, and then they imparted their expert knowledge of the technology and how they had applied it in other places. And so when they left, we actually had a very strong bench strength to not only further develop additional initiatives within that program. The staff obviously was a lot more confident in their abilities, but we built up our bench strength there. And once again, because this was done as a program, we saw we were able to look beyond sort of the initial project and understand what needed to be there. So having good business partners and consultants is key when you don't have the bench strength. And to me, it's also very effective way of bringing up your staff's expertise, because they learn while they do it. I've never been a big fan of sending staff out to 5-day training course on how to on some technology. Then they come back, and then you spend maybe a month trying to figure out what the project is, and eventually when you actually go to do it, a lot of the knowledge they brought back has dissipated, and as well as they had no practical way of enforcing the knowledge that they learned, because they they might have done some in-class exercise, but they weren't actually able to do it when they got back to the desk. So to me, it's much more effective. Bring the expertise in, have them work with your staff, get them trained up, and then make sure that before those people leave, that your staff is very confident in moving on to the next steps. That's not just my experience there. I learned that quite well when I did my first SAP implementation. And, back then, I'm dating myself, that was back in the 90s. There wasn't a whole lot of SAP expertise out there, but we brought the people in, I worked with them, and I made sure that before they left, I knew or I felt very confident in moving forward with the next tasks.
Excellent. And an offset of that question is that most of your team works in a single time zone, or have teams, because a lot of organizations these days, as you know, are outsourcing a lot of their large implementations, and which means that their teams working in multiple different time zones in multiple different continents, with different cultures. Do you have any experience in that, and any guidance to people on how to successfully integrate people from different cultures, different time zones, to deliver a successful program?
Not for project development. Operationally, yes. I've had outsourcers where they provide 24-hour support. The best piece of advice I can give you is, do not outsource your thinking. You need the knowledge to stay in house, and you need the decision making and the thinking process in house. If you are going to outsource, those should be relegated to the commodity items, where the thinking's already been done, the engineering has been done in house, and then you can use third parties to actually execute. But when they execute, they're given a well drafted script that they can follow, and I think that's when it works the best. But putting decisions or critical business decisions out to third parties, I think you're probably setting yourself up for some problems.
Thank you so much, Rocco. I appreciate your time again. I know there's so much to talk about. You have such a wealth of information that our audience will enjoy. Maybe in future we can set up another call where we can learn more from what you are doing these days. But I'm sure our audience, you may have enjoyed, or you will enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed having this conversation with Rocco. Any parting words, Rocco, before we close the call?
No, I always tell my staff, I used to give them, sort of some guiding principles. and I used to say, you know what, if you need to make a decision and there's no one else around, I said, use this thought process. I said two things. Spend the money like it was your own, and run your operation like it was your own business, and those were your customers. So to me, those are always the two guiding principles I gave them. Run it like it's your own business, and spend the money like it's your own. And I said, typically, if you follow those two directives, the probability of making a bad decision is low.
Spoken like a wise man, and as always, pleasure speaking with you, Rocco. Have a wonderful, wonderful holidays and a new year, and we'll definitely connect again in New Year. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is it for today. Thank you for listening. I would love to hear from you and help out in any way I can. You can reach me at cjdevgan.com. If you like our show, please subscribe, leave a rating and a review for us. Let's go out and break barriers and generate new possibilities. Until next time, adios, ciao, and goodbye.